Welcome back to the Vale Echo. Today, we descend into the chilling story that defined America's dark past, the tale of a man whose genius was only matched by his evil. The man known as H. Holmes, America's first serial killer. It was the late 1880s. Chicago stood tall, a city of smoke, ambition, and the promise of a new century. Steam engines hissed, carriages rattled down cobblestone streets, and the skyline shimmered under a dim orange dusk. But hidden beneath this booming city, something far darker was taking shape, a nightmare disguised as a dream. A new building began to rise on the corner of 63rd Street and Wallace Avenue. To the world, it was a grand hotel, a place where travelers visiting the upcoming World's Fair could rest in luxury. Its sign read the World's Fair Hotel, elegant and inviting. But to one man, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, it was much more. It was a trap. Holmes, charming and impeccably dressed, carried himself like a gentleman. His calm voice, piercing eyes, and confident smile made him the perfect predator. People saw a successful businessman and doctor. What they didn't see was the calculating monster hiding behind the mask. The so-called murder castle was his masterpiece. Every brick laid had a sinister purpose. Hallways twisted into nowhere, doors opened into solid walls, staircases led to sudden drops. Behind elegant wallpaper there were hidden peepholes allowing Holmes to watch his guests without them ever knowing. Inside the castle, gas pipes ran secretly through the walls, connecting to rooms Holmes had specially designed. He could control them from his office, releasing deadly fumes into the chambers while his victims slept. Beneath the floors, chutes led straight to the basement, where horrors no one could imagine awaited. Holmes carefully planned every detail. He hired and fired builders repeatedly so no one would ever know the castle's true design. To outsiders, it was a hotel under endless construction. To him, it was a maze of death, a personal playground for his twisted experiments. Visitors came and went, young women seeking work, travelers from out of town, curious guests drawn by the charm of the World's Fair. They checked in, smiled, and vanished without a trace. At night, Chicago slept under the smoke and gaslight, unaware that within its heart stood a building that breathed evil. And inside it, Holmes watched through the darkness, his reflection flickering in the glow of a candle, calm, composed, and calculating his next move. This was only the beginning, the birth of a nightmare that would haunt American history forever. The murder castle was complete, and the devil had found his home. Stay with us because in the next chapter we'll step inside those deadly walls where every hallway hides a secret and every room tells a story soaked in blood. The year was 1893, the World's Fair had arrived in Chicago and with it, millions of visitors from across the globe. The city was alive with lights, laughter, and wonder. But just a few miles away from the fairgrounds, on a quiet street corner, stood a building that whispered fear even in daylight: Holmes' murder castle. From the outside, it looked like a luxurious hotel, brick walls, ornate windows, and a welcoming sign that read the World's Fair Hotel. But once you stepped inside, the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavy, the lights dimmed, and the hallways stretched endlessly like a labyrinth built by the devil himself. Holmes greeted his guests with a courteous smile, his charm as polished as his shoes. Women found him handsome, intelligent, trustworthy. He offered them comfort, safety, and opportunity, but all he gave them was silence, the eternal kind. Inside, the castle's design was pure madness or pure genius, depending on how you saw it. There were staircases that led to nowhere, doors that opened to brick walls, and corridors that looped back on themselves. Gas lamps flickered along the narrow halls, casting long shadows that danced like specters on the wallpaper. Behind one of those walls, Holmes stood, peering through hidden peepholes, watching his prey. Every move, every frightened glance, he studied them with cold precision. When the time was right, he'd flip a switch and the horror would begin. Some rooms were soundproof, no matter how loud the screams, no one outside could hear. Others were airtight, connected to hidden gas lines that Holmes could control from his office. With a subtle turn of a valve, the air turned deadly. Victims would stumble through the maze, disoriented and terrified. Some found trapdoors that dropped them down metal chutes straight into the basement. Down there in the cold dark stood Holmes, instruments of terror, surgical tables, acid vats, and furnaces that erased all traces of his crimes. Police later said it looked like a slaughterhouse designed by a scientist, a laboratory of death. Bones and burnt remains were found mixed with melted tools, jars filled with organs lined dusty shelves, and in the corner a large furnace glowed faintly, its walls blackened from years of use. Every brick of the murder castle seemed to breathe fear. It wasn't just a building, it was alive, feeding on pain, trapping souls in its endless corridors. Holmes had built himself a kingdom where he ruled as both creator and destroyer. And as the fair's fireworks burst over Chicago's skyline, lighting the night with joy, no one realized that only a few blocks away, smoke was rising from the castle's chimney, not from a fireplace, but from something far more sinister. The devil was working, and no one could stop him. The year was 1894. The grand illusion of the World's Fair had faded, leaving behind dust, broken dreams, and one horrifying secret still lurking in Chicago's South Side, the murder castle. For years, people had come and vanished without explanation. But now, the walls of Holmes' empire of terror were beginning to crack. It started with whispers, rumors of missing women, unpaid bills, and strange deliveries to Holmes' building. Detectives began to ask questions. Why were the hotel's builders always fired before finishing their work? Why did neighbors hear noises in the night, screams muffled behind thick walls and the hiss of gas pipes? Holmes, ever confident, continued his charade. He smiled through every inquiry, moved from city to city, and even changed identities. He married multiple women, all unaware of the monster they shared their home with, but his arrogance would be his downfall. A trail of fraud, deceit, and murder was finally catching up to him. When police finally entered the murder castle, what they found was beyond imagination. Hallways twisted into darkness, secret chambers lined the walls, and hidden rooms told stories of suffering too gruesome to describe. Beneath the building, in the cold basement, investigators discovered human remains, bones, charred fragments, and surgical tables stained with secrets. The newspapers called it the House of Horrors. Headlines screamed across America, "The Devil in Chicago, H. Holmes exposed." The nation was captivated and horrified. People who once walked by that building now shuddered, realizing they had passed by the lair of a serial killer who hid in plain sight. During his trial, Holmes stood calm and composed, dressed impeccably, his voice steady as he told the court he was born with the devil in him. The jury listened in stunned silence. Behind his eyes there was no guilt, no remorse, only the satisfaction of a man who believed himself untouchable. When the verdict came, Holmes barely flinched. Guilty. He was sentenced to death. Even then, he spoke with chilling calm, saying he would live on in infamy, and in that he wasn't wrong. On the morning of his execution in 1896, the sky was gray, the air heavy. As the rope was placed around his neck, Holmes stood tall, emotionless. The crowd watched in silence as the man who built a castle of death took his final breath. Yet even in death, his legend refused to fade. Soon after, the murder castle burned to the ground, flames consuming its walls like the city's attempt to cleanse its soul. But the ashes couldn't erase the evil that once lived there. Today, the building is gone, replaced by ordinary streets and shops. Yet locals say that sometimes when the night is still and the wind passes through 63rd Street, you can hear faint whispers, echoes of victims lost, calling from the corridors of a castle that once belonged to the devil himself. And that, dear viewers, is the legacy of H. Holmes, a man who built his own hell and called it home.